and welcome to this week's book club episode for Star Wars Most Wanted. We're going through this book 2 chapters at a time and breaking down the themes and happenings that are happening within. This week is the penultimate episode for this book, chapters 19 and 20, and this book only goes up to chapter 22. So we are getting to the conclusion. And if you read these 2 chapters, or how we doing? Everybody doing okay? Everybody hanging in there? Because it was a brutal end to what we read this week. And really, really looking forward to the closure that will hopefully come in the next 2 chapters of this book. But we will get to how these chapters ended here in a second. Let's just kind of go through the story as it happens. We're going to pick up with chapter 19. Qi'ra, at this point, has been offered a position to work with the engineer. She's not sure if she wants to take it. Han gruffly makes a comment about it and leaves the room, and then he and Sulo go for a tour of the ship. And that's where we left off in the story. We pick up here with Qi'ra still kind of weighing that decision, and the engineer is implying to her that this is largely because she has feelings for Han, and Han has feelings for her, and how Qi'ra shouldn't let a boy stand in her way because there will be other boys out there. And at some level, I do think that there is this budding relationship between Han and Qi'ra. I've mentioned that in a couple of videos here, but Qi'ra is very convinced that that is not what's holding her back, and I certainly believe her. I think that there can be multiple things going on here. The course of this chapter is really her mental excursion to figure out why she's feeling like she should say no to the best thing that's ever happened to her in her life. The engineer gives her one day to decide, and Qi'ra leaves and goes to find Han and Sulo. Sulo is having a great time hanging out with the engineers on the ship. There's even another Rhodian, and he's getting to kind of have some connection with some people who understand him, and he can ask all the technical questions he wants, and she decides to leave him alone because he's happy. She finds Han in the cockpit of the ship, learning how to fly from the pilot. The pilot is, of course, a Wookiee. I don't know, just the idea of Han being in the cockpit and learning how to fly from a Wookiee, and then to go on to have his friendship with Chewbacca, I thought was kind of a sweet connection. And it does show you him picking up a little bit more Shri'walk, even though he knew some of it already. So all in all, I thought that was a good connection. But again, Qi'ra's seeing Han really where he's supposed to be, and I think that's part of what's weighing on her is, Sulo should be on this ship, Han should be on this ship, and Qi'ra doesn't like that she's been offered this and her friends haven't been. But it's also during these exchanges that she realizes part of what's bothering her, that she sees how Han talks to Rue, the pilot, how he talks to Sulo, how he talked to her and always treated her like an individual person, how he talks to droids, and realizes that Han treats everyone like people. And the engineer, Jenra, she treats everyone like assets. And that's where that line of the Wookiee being one of her best assets that we heard prior, it comes back. And Qi'ra starts to realize that maybe she doesn't want to be an asset, maybe she wants to be a person. And then comes the big question, is it worth getting everything you ever wanted if it means you're just going to be a name on a list? Qi'ra falls asleep back in their bunk room instead of following Han and Sulo around. She's trying to think out every eventuality for what would happen if she went with Jenra. The idea of, she'd probably be discarded eventually, but by then Qi'ra could have saved up money, she could have resources of her own, she could go and live her own life, their lack of, or them going different ways doesn't have to be personal, and she's trying to think through every eventuality and eventually falls asleep. But what's really getting her too is, like I said, this weighing of getting everything she ever wanted is, it's not even just a gift. Qi'ra knows she earned it, she impressed this engineer. So as much as Han does belong there and Sulo does belong there, she knows she belongs there too. So it's not really that guilt, and yet there is something kind of holding her back that she's trying to figure out. They all wake up the next day and the auction has happened. Proxima did everything Proxima said she was going to do, and the Kaldana won their bid. The droid Gatra put in the same bid as last time, which is not the smartest thing, but it's very possible that the bid they had last time was everything they had and they didn't have the ability to offer more. The Kaldana offered above that, and now they are getting the shields, which is not the eventuality that we wanted as we were going through this book, or at least not the eventuality that our characters wanted. And Sulo and Han try to say that. They try to say, hey, the right thing is to give it the shield to the droids, and why not do what's best? And Sulo even talks about the Force a little bit, and Qi'ra eventually can say something rational to that, and Qi'ra talks about how amazing it is that she's in this position where she can like influence big events, and this is part of what she would gain if she went with the engineer. And she talks about the rational reasons, which is if you give the shields to the Kaldana, they're just going to be more powerful pilots, which is just going to shut down lanes through Corellia and other systems. And does that really help you if the pirates are more powerful? But General ultimately decides that more powerful pirates means that they can fight against the Empire better, which ultimately helps her, and that she needs to do that for her. And this is the point where Qi'ra realizes that that Genra really only cares about herself. The engineer only cares about herself. And that's another thing that makes Qi'ra leery of joining her. It's at the end of this chapter that once again, Qi'ra is given the offer to join with the engineer, and she doesn't want to answer yet. So they're going to go meet with the Kaldana. As it turns out, they have to make the exchange, and the Kaldana will return them to Corellia. And everyone's a little bit like, this seems like a bad idea. So then the chapter ends with them walking off. Chapter 20 picks up from Han's perspective. They go to the exchange. Han is vacillating between what Qi'ra is deciding. He thinks at first that she decided to not go or not stay with the engineer because she went with them. Then is thinking that she is going to stay with the engineer because she gives Sulo the cube. And he's really just trying to figure out what's going on and figure out why he has such a bad instinct about her staying with the engineer. But to his credit, he's not getting all up in Qi'ra's business about it. He's not trying to control her or say what she should do. Maybe he's not handling it the best because he is being gruff, he is being rude, he doesn't know how to handle his emotions, but he's also not pushing her. So, Han's human, and he's that good-hearted human that we know where he's really flawed, but it's all heart of gold underneath. But as I said, the engineer originally gives the cube to Qi'ra, and she gives it back to Sulo, because she's like, you carried it this far, you should continue to carry it, which is something Sulo appreciates. And now's the point where Qi'ra has to decide. She doesn't know what to say, Han doesn't know what to say, so Sulo says that he's going to miss her and pulls Qi'ra into a big hug, which is something that Qi'ra is not sure about at first, but then returns wholeheartedly, which is something that surprises Han. And it's at this point that Qi'ra says she can't leave her friends. She's decided not to stay with the engineer. Now, before the engineer leaves, she brings Qi'ra over and whispers something to her, and then they all get into the ship. Now, Qi'ra is tactical as ever. She pretends to trip, or at least Han suspects she pretends to trip, and I'm inclined to agree with him, so she can get in close to her two friends and say that the engineer warned her that the Kaldana are probably going to kill them. This is the crux of it. I mean, imagine you're Qi'ra and you stay with the engineer, and then you would inevitably find out that Han and Sulo never returned to Corellia, and your friends died while you get to live in this lavish place, and just what that would have done to her. And I think that at some level she knew that she would be choosing to save herself at the expense of her friends. But now they're all in trouble together. As they go to complete the exchange, a couple of things are happening all at once. We find out that the Kaldana don't just hate droids, they hate anybody who's not human. They're incredibly speciesist towards Sulo, referring to him as an it, openly complaining about what he's doing on the ship and saying how he's such a problem to have around. They say some very mean things that they have to kind of work through. Of course, it's kind of nice because no one can understand Sulo except for Han and a little bit from Qi'ra, so Sulo can just insult them as much as he wants. But the exchange goes on, and Han starts to taunt the pirates because he just wants to kind of get them on edge. And his hope was to rile the pirates up and maybe have them turn on leadership by saying how poor the condition of the ship they're in was. But then it turns out that the pirates are like almost like this crazy death enthusiast group. And they all cheer about, death being around the corner or whatever. And so that plan on Han's part doesn't really go his way. Han also is commenting on the poor state of the ship, and I found this really amusing. He talks about how if he ever had a ship, he wouldn't have, replacement bulkheads, he'd keep everything nice, there wouldn't be stains everywhere, just how immaculate his ship would be. And then we all know what the Millennium Falcon ends up looking like, and in fact, that's a big difference when we meet the Falcon in Solo: A Star Wars Story, how immaculate Lando keeps it, and then how the Falcon ultimately is under Han. So that was just kind of a funny, ironic part of the narrative in the middle of some very serious things. They get to the end of the exchange, and the Kaldana are like, well, we're going to kill you. And so Qi'ra has another gas bomb that the engineer gave her. The engineer definitely wouldn't have cared about Han or Sulo dying, but she does seem to care a little bit about Qi'ra. Not enough to stop them from going and dying, not enough to, like, keep Qi'ra back forcibly, or just not send the kids into the situation, but enough to, like, give Qi'ra a way to get out of the situation herself if she's able, maybe even as another kind of a test or a bit of curiosity. So Qi'ra throws the gas bomb, and they have to run for it while not breathing, and it's really brutal. And they get into a turbo lift, they get out, and they, like, fill up the turbo lift with junk so nobody else can follow it, which is a really smart move on Kira's part. That's not something I ever would have thought of, so I thought that was a really cool move. They get to a bulkhead door, which Sulo breaks open, and then it all happens. Yeah. They go through the door, they're getting shot at by the Kaldana. Sulo stumbles, Han pulls him through the door, they get the door shut, and it's at this point they realize that Sulo has been shot. So after an entire novel of one daring and lucky escape after another, someone doesn't make it, and Sulo... Oh, this is brutal. I remembered that Sulo died, so it was a little bit less jarring for me this time around. I didn't remember when it happened, I just remember that it happened. I was a little bit more prepared for it, but it's still really brutal. And then as he dies, some things happen. You know, he gives them his data pad and says, you know, you just have to believe you can do it. But what's wild is after telling Han you just have to believe you can do it, because of course they don't really know how to use a data pad the way he does, he then follows up with, the Force wasn't real, was it? So he's having this belief for his friends that his friends can still do this contact with the Force and just believe, but he's starting to not believe it for himself and kind of fall into this despair. Han's not sure what to do, and Qi'ra's the one who steps in and is, you know, she holds him and says, no, the Force was real and it was with you this whole time. And he believes it. And so after being the character of faith through the whole book, and he kind of falters now at his most dark moment, you know, Qi'ra gets to give that back to him. And it was a very sweet moment. And, you know, Sulo dying is such a tragedy, but he got to be with his friends, he got to hear this hopeful message, and that doesn't make it fine that he died, but, you know, he died helping his friends, and that's what he would have wanted to do. Han goes into blind rage mode, he starts punching the door, hurts his hand, because he does, but Qi'ra eventually pulls him away, and Han snaps out of it, because he knows he has to save his friend, or his remaining friend, right? He lost Sulo, but he doesn't want to lose Qi'ra. And basically, the end of this chapter is a cliffhanger of whether or not they're going to get away, and we're left with how this is all going to resolve in the next two chapters. Now, a death like this with Sulo is something, because obviously we know going into this book that Han and Qi'ra can't die. We also know where Han and Qi'ra are going to end up, because we've seen the movie. Even if you read the book before you saw the movie, that's kind of on you, because the book didn't come out until, like, the day the movie released, at least in the United States. So, you know, you're kind of making that decision to do so. So there wasn't a whole lot in this book that could be done to have a surprise or to have an unknown outcome. And so you have Sulo, and it, you know, if you're a savvy reader who likes to anticipate what authors are going to do, you might have wondered, like, is Sulo going to die because no one else can? But I feel like even if you're that type of reader, like, they had gone through so much and Sulo had been with them through so much, and to even have had him, you know, be the person that got through to Qi'ra so that she doesn't leave, you know, it just felt like a lot to then have him go right then. But it is suspect because he's not in Solo: A Star Wars Story. He was really heart and soul of this book, and losing him is rough, but it also shows just how dangerous this life that these characters are living in really is. But with that, as I said, that is our penultimate episode of our journey through Most Wanted. Next week we will finish the book. We'll read chapters 21 and 22. Next week I will also say what we're going to be reading next. Right now it's still, I'm thinking Dark Disciple, Catalyst, or Rebel Rising. Right now I think it's more people are interested in Catalyst. But I'm really interested in hearing what you all would have to say. We will take a couple of weeks off, partly because I don't own any of those 3 books. I got all 3 of them from the library when they came out, so I'm going to be relying on Amazon and Amazon is a little slower these days, for those of you who are watching as these videos come out. So I'll give enough time for anybody who needs to acquire whatever we pick, in case they don't already have it. But I'll have information on all of that next week, but it's not too late to tell me if you want to suggest something else or see what we're interested in. But that's really all I have to say for now. If you're not already, please follow us on all the socials. That is a great place to reach out and tell me what you would like to read if you don't want to leave it in a comment. And I will talk to you guys next week.